Hello students. Today in this video we will study about the need for new economic policy or the need for new economic reforms of 1991. An economy is the start and end of everything. When India got independence in 1947, she inherited a shattered economy. Our economy was completely ruined, and it was mainly because of the exploitative policies adopted by the Britishers. Now, when we became independent, the job of nation building was in the hands of the leaders of independent India. Now, they had to decide, among other things, what type of economic system will be suitable for our nation. So, India followed a mixed economic system with the emphasis on large public sector. We also followed the policy of protectionism, we followed the policy of import substitution, we followed the policy of economic interventions. So we will see what happened between 1950 to 1990 in a nutshell. The first 5-year plan was launched in 1951 and we followed a socialistic pattern of society. We laid more emphasis on the public sector and private sector was existing but it was given only a secondary role. We followed a policy of L, P, and Q. L stands for license, P stands for permits, and Q stands for quota. All these three things, license, permits, quotas, they affected the production, exports, and imports adversely. The main focus was on protecting the domestic industry from foreign competition. We cannot deny that these things like license, permits, and quotas they were not at all good. But yes, the end result was very disappointing. The public sector became centers of corruption, they became very inefficient, and the private sector, because there was no competition, they failed to diversify their products, they failed to modernize, and all these things together made the Indian economy a stagnant economy, which ultimately led to the economic crisis of 1991. Now we will study what happened in 1991, what were the reasons at that time. The first reason was fiscal deficit. Now, what is fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit basically refers to the borrowings of the government. And why does the government borrow? When the total expenditure of the government exceeds the total revenue of the government has to resort to borrowings. And obviously, borrowings are never good, especially when the government expenditure is basically on non development programs or policies. And this happened at that time. High fiscal deficit always leads to inflation because high borrowings are there and which leads to inflation. And inflation means high cost of living for the consumer class because prices are very high, consumers cannot afford, so it is not good for the consumer class also, and it is also not good for the producers also because of high cost of inputs. This hinders the process of growth. Fiscal deficit was estimated to be 5.4% of GDP in 81-82 and it increased to 8.4% of GDP in 1990-91. India got into the situation of debt trap and the international financial institutions they lost faith on our country. Next reason was balance of payments crisis. Balance of payment crisis means a situation when balance of payment is in deficit. When does this deficit occurs? When the difference between total receipts and total payments of a country on account of its economic transactions with the rest of the world is unfavorable. Payment for imports and receipts for exports are the two main items of balance of payments. There can be two accounts in balance of payment, current account and capital account. Current account deals with the exports and imports of goods and services. Capital account deals with investment and borrowings. So when we talk about Indian economy, current account balance at that time, it was very high. It was on the alarming situation, and the reason was high borrowing at that time, high imports, and very low exports. In 1980-81, balance of payments on current account was adverse to the tune of rupees 2,214 crore, and in 1990-91 it increased to rupees 17,367 crore. Foreign loans, which were 12% of GDP in 1980-81, increased to 23% of GDP in 1990-91. So it is a very big figure, and as a result, the burden of foreign debt increased on our economy. And in 1980-81, foreign debt service constituted 15% of our export earning, while in 1990-91 it increased to 30%. Again, this is a very alarming situation. This caused a severe depletion in our foreign exchange reserves, and one of the reasons why international monetary institutions lost faith in our country. Gulf crisis was the next reason. On account of Iraq war in 1990-91, prices of petrol shot up. Now, when the prices of petrol rises, it obviously affects the prices of other commodities as well. And at that time, India used to receive huge amount of remittances from Gulf countries in foreign exchange, and because of that war, the remittances took a serious hit. The Gulf crisis thus led to deepen the balance of payment crisis because we were not able to get the remittances. Next reason is fall in foreign exchange reserves. Now this is a very important reason at that time. In 1990-91, India's foreign exchange reserves fell to such a low level that these were not enough to pay for an import bill of even 10 days. Foreign exchange reserves that were rupees 8,151 crore in 1986-87, it declined to a level of 6,250 crore in 89-90. The situation became so grave that the government had to mortgage country's gold reserve with the World Bank, and government was very helpless and was advised to follow the policy of liberalization by the World Bank. Next reason was price spiral or inflation. At one stage, average annual rate of inflation was found to be 16.7%. This rate is very high, and this deepened the economic crisis, and this inflation was mainly because of rapid increase in money supply. This in turn was due to the excessive resort to deficit financing. You have just seen that the government of India resorted to deficit financing. And deficit financing, what it is, it refers to the borrowings from Reserve Bank of India by the government to cope with its deficit. So we were going through balance of payments deficit, and to cope up with all such things, we resorted to deficit financing, and by printing of additional currency, we faced another problem, that was the problem of inflation. And this led to the high cost of production and high prices for the goods also. Next reason is poor performance of public sector units. In 1951, there were only 5 public sector units, but in 1991, the number became 246. Government invested a huge amount of money in these public sector units, and in the initial 15 years, they performed well, but later on, they started to show losses. In the previous chapter, you have studied about the problems faced by the public sector units. And because of the poor performance, public sector undertakings, they became in a way a liability for the government. So now we will see what is the combined effect of all the reasons. The combined effect of all these factors was that the government was forced to seek economic help from the World Bank and IMF. We were able to manage the crisis when we got the loan of $7 billion, but this came with a price. This loan was a tied loan. We were not only advised, but we were compelled to pursue, to follow the policy of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. All these three things together form the new economic policy. So this is why we were forced to implement the economic reforms in our country. We were forced to introduce new economic policy in our country. That is the policy of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. We will study about these things, L, P, G, in the next video. Thank you so much.